So when I'm supporting a patient with reflux or heartburn, or maybe you have the diagnosis of GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, I will be looking to treat the root cause, and that is a huge priority. Without treating the reason why, you're just going to be band-aiding the condition, and you'll never get long-term success with that approach. But there's nothing wrong with Band-Aids, and today we're going to be talking about the herbal approach that I would use to bring about symptomatic relief so that the patient feels better and is game to take on, these root cause treatments, which can take a bit longer. So we're going to talk about my favorite herbs to use, where I'd start with one and work to the next, what doses, how to prepare them, and we're going to be focusing on herbal demulcents, these mucilaginous polysaccharide-rich herbs that form this gel or this gruel. They really thicken up when you mix it with water. So I'm not here to bag conventional medicine. They've got great diagnostic capabilities. They can kind of find and diagnose conditions, really well. Some pharmaceuticals are essential for some of my patients. I totally recognize that. Antibiotics, I think they're way overprescribed, but they can save life or limb. But I do see acid blocking medications used a little bit too frequently for my comfort level. Long-term, recommendation of an acid blocking medication like a proton pump inhibitor, it does have consequences. Things like nutrient absorption and bone mineral density issues. It can lead to bacterial overgrowth and fungal overgrowth, and there's no real exit strategy. So when a patient goes on and they're recommended this PPI medication to block their stomach acid because they have all this reflux, oh great, I feel so much better. And so let's try and transition off. And when they try and transition off, most of them get this really strong acid rebound. All their symptoms flare 1 to 100, and they say, I must need this medication, so they're back on it indefinitely. So if we wanted to go down the herbal route first before exploring these acid blocking medications, first priority would be to provide symptomatic relief, build up that mucus lining in the esophagus. So again, when the stomach acid does reflux, it's not damaging those cells that line the esophagus. And this is helpful for symptoms. People feel better on them, almost immediate relief for most patients. And also because certain reflux patients, a subset of them can wind up developing this condition called Barrett's esophagus, which is a pre-cancer kind of development in this condition because of all this damage to the cells that line the esophagus. Let's talk herbs. I'm going to run through the herbs and then we'll circle back and talk about some individual points on them and dosing as well. Top of the pile here, marshmallow root. Licorice is really helpful, aloe vera is really helpful, slippery elm, that's kind of down the list for a reason, even though it's super effective. We're going to talk about that. And a little wild card that most people wouldn't think about when they think about reflux would be carob powder. And this can be really helpful for children, but we'll talk about that soon. So we want to start low with these herbal medicines, building up as needed, and a huge pearl here, something that I see, misunderstood frequently, is that we want to dose them after meals and if needed before bed. Why? Most reflux patients, you might be the odd one out here, but most reflux patients will experience their symptoms after meals. That triggers their symptoms, their reflux, right? And so if you consume these herbal demulcents before the meal, they're not going to be there forming that mucus lining in the esophagus when the stomach acid's refluxing back up. If you take it after the meal, it's there performing that little function and protecting that esophageal lining so that, again, when the stomach acid refluxes, stomach acid can actually damage the cells. There's a bit of a herbal barrier there. Now, if we're talking about dosing with marshmallow root powder, super sustainable. I love this herb, really affordable. I do something like 1 teaspoon to a tablespoon, 1 to 3 times a day. You can take big dose of this one, mix it in with cold water, consume it after meals, look for improvements, ramp it up up if you have to. And this goes for all of these herbal demulcents. If that's not cutting it, little bit more effort on your part, but it would be working with cold water infusions. And that's basically mixing the same dose, 1 teaspoon to a tablespoon, 1 to 3 times a day. The dose would be something like a tablespoon per cup of cold water. So you can kind of work out that math. And you would be mixing it in cold water, setting it aside overnight to do its thing. In the morning, you're gonna wake up and it's gonna be this very thick gruel-like substance. It can be hard to choke down, I totally get that. And you would be consuming that after meals. Keep it in the fridge, it'll last 2 to 3 days. You can make a big batch if you want to. And if it's really hard to choke down, you can water it down a little bit more or even mix it in food as well. Licorice is that second herb. I love, love, love licorice. I like using licorice as a whole herb. It's a lower dose herb, so up to a teaspoon, up to 3 teaspoons a day if you want to go quite high on the licorice dose. I wouldn't recommend getting there unless you're working with a herbalist. And if you wanted to avoid some of those kind of concerns around higher dose licorice, if you tried a little bit and it was really helpful and you want to take more, then DGL, deglycerinized licorice. They've removed that glycyrrhizin that's responsible for things like high blood pressure in some patients and wasting of potassium as well. It doesn't happen in most patients. Most patients tolerate licorice, no problem. But for the patients that are either concerned or they already have high blood pressure and they're using licorice to treat their reflux, just working with DGL can be a nice, safe way to bring this herb in. Again, you can get them in little chewable tablets, and you chew 1 to 2 tablets after meals or as needed. Should be almost immediately helpful for that reflux symptom. Number 3, we've got aloe vera. Again, you can get this as a juice or a gel, very, very strong, kind of condensed. And here we want the inner leaf. Look on your package, make sure it's the inner leaf of the aloe vera, because the whole gel of aloe vera, not just the inner leaf, the whole gel, it has some very stimulating laxative properties in it. Anthraquinone glycosides. So if you're constipated and you're refluxing, you might work with the whole aloe vera. If you have some growing, it could be helpful, but I would be working with a product. Here with aloe vera, I'm mainly using it in combo products. Slippery elm, now this should be at the top of the list because it's super, super effective and it's really easy to take. It's a very nice, pleasant tasting herbal medicine. And the reason why it's not top of the pile, again, it's really effective, it's really easy to take. It's because I'm not so comfortable with the sourcing of most slippery elm, and because it's harder to source and it's less sustainable, it's quite expensive as well. But if all the other herbs aren't working and we're not getting traction, I will still recommend slippery elm. We're using this short term to kind of get ahead of these symptoms and treat the root cause. So, I wouldn't expect someone to be on slippery elm long term. And it's the same dose as marshmallow root. It'd be a teaspoon to a tablespoon, 1 to 3 times a day. Mix it in cold water, take it after meals. And if you really need that extra bump, then you can work with that cold water infusion overnight. Same dosing as marshmallow root. You can get slippery elm in capsules. I don't see great benefit. You can work with the whole herb mixed in water first, and once we start to get that momentum, you can start to work back to capsules. But again, the whole herb mixed in water is so much stronger. Doesn't taste as nice, and it's easier to pop a capsule. But if you're looking for relief, then I would go with the whole powder mixed in water. Carob powder, this is the wild card, and you probably don't think of carob powder as a demulcent herbal medicine. I will use carob powder for children who are dealing with a lot of that upper digestive inflammation, unsettled tummy, if they're dealing with a bit of that reflux presentation as well. And the really big caveat here is that carob is very high in FODMAPs. So if you are dealing with SIBO, or if you're not tolerant to these FODMAPs, these fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, and polyols in foods, you probably probably won't tolerate carob. You probably get gassy and bloated, and maybe it'll trigger diarrhea. But for anyone that can tolerate FODMAPs, carob is very, very palatable, very easy to take. And I would be working for adults with a dose of a teaspoon to a tablespoon 1 to 3 times a day. 3 tablespoons of carob powder, it's a pretty high dose. And for children, we would have to modulate that dose based on weight. So a quick little pause before we move on. If you are getting something out of this video, then please like it, leave a comment, subscribe. That tells me you're getting something out of it, and I'll keep putting them together for you. So if we're moving on to nutrients, the top of the pile for soothing and healing that lining would be zinc carnosine. And most of the studies that I've reviewed with zinc carnosine are focused on the stomach and healing and soothing the gastric lining, whether it's gastric ulcers or gastritis, inflammation of that stomach lining. The mechanism of action still holds up, that zinc carnosine would be helpful to heal and soothe the esophageal lining too. And even if it didn't, even if zinc carnosine just passes through the esophagus and works on the stomach, most reflux patients, whether they're dealing with that GERD or that heartburn, most of their presentations are driven, at least in part, if not solely, by dysfunctions in the stomach. So, zinc carnosine, maybe it should be in a different video where we're treating root causes. Let's talk about it now. From the animal studies, we can see that zinc carnosine has a natural affinity to damaged mucosa, and it can help stabilize that damaged mucosa and help with repair. And it's potently antioxidant, and it's potently anti-inflammatory as well. So now that we have that mucosal lining protected and the symptoms are improved, we can move on to root cause treatments. Now that will be a future video, so stay tuned for that. Got anything out of the video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you are living in Australia or New Zealand, you're dealing with digestive health issues, then reach out to the clinic. There will be a link in the description below. Love to hear from you.